Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the final press conference for ASA and ICA's joint meeting. We're really excited to close out our day with some wonderful presenters as well as an overview and preview of ASA's jam session. So if you have a chance to make it to the jam session, you should come along. Just a couple of reminders. Obviously, this is being live streamed, so if you would like a recording, please reach out to media@aip.org, especially if you're part of the media and would like to talk to any of our presenters today. You can also reach out to us and we will help get you in touch. So, to begin, we are going to have Gregory Miller come up and talk about helping noisy data centers fit into residential neighborhoods. I'll pull this up. Oh, that's not the beginning, sorry. Oh yeah, it is, great. All right, go ahead.
Great, thank you very much. So again, my name is Greg Miller. I'm with Trinity Consultants, Cerami Associates, and we are presented some of our work the other day about recent experiences working with data centers and the noise from them. One of the things that has been a really big issue with noise with data centers over the last few decades, but last few years in particular, is that the noise emanating from the data centers can be significant. And many of the communities nearby are not prepared with clear or enforceable regulations to minimize the impact of that noise on residents. So rather than this being a story of the big bad developer of the data center taking advantage of the unprepared locals, we're actually here to talk more about the story of how data center developers and local communities are finding ways to mutually coexist and thrive. Data centers are spaces that are filled with racks and racks of computers, and those computers generate a lot of heat, and on top of those buildings are massive amounts of air conditioning systems that are generating very high levels of noise. The data center market is exploding due to cloud storage options, cloud computing options, as well as now, of course, the AI revolution as it's going. So we really see no sign of the data center market slowing down at all. There's a lot of typical hotbeds where data centers have typically been developed: Northern California, Northern Virginia, California, Arizona. They often have good noise regulations in place after a lot of experience over time. But newer developments are happening all over the place: Ohio, Idaho, Texas, New Mexico, often with very little regulation in place. Now, a major change that's happening is that we've kind of run out of a lot of the sites that are relatively near to residential areas, and we're starting to see data centers build more and more out in areas that were previously zoned for agriculture. But now we're getting 500,000 square foot buildings full of this computer equipment. And this can be an area where the noise that enters a community can have very, very strong and very emotional reaction, and that is completely understandable and something that we are strong advocates of making sure that the noise for these new communities is very well protected. But it's also a good thing for us to make sure that the data center developers also understand what kinds of noise levels they need to meet. And in fact, in our experience, most of them want to do that. Because if they're looking to develop one data center, then another, then another, then another, the idea is that everybody needs to be on the same page. So if they can succeed by proving to a community, demonstrating that, look, we've done it elsewhere, and we've done it successfully, then there's a way that we can have an excellent mutual coexistence moving ahead. So one of the parts that we play in the process as the acoustics experts we're trying to make sure that there's of course the technical side of controlling the noise. That's a big part of the job. But something which is very particular that we've been working a lot in is how to get the codes and everything established in the first place. There's 3 areas to find codes. First is looking at what the applicable codes are, what happens if we don't have any codes, and then what do we do to work with the authorities having jurisdiction, the AHJ, as we would typically refer to it, in order to make sure that we all get on the same page. In the first place that you can go is looking at state-level codes, but honestly, most codes that are written at a state level from a noise perspective are pretty useless. It might be along the lines of don't create a nuisance, and who defines what a nuisance is, et cetera, et cetera. They're not typically very useful. An interesting area that we find that we're getting involved with a lot of understanding what the codes are related to power siting boards. And the reason why that is just because we're putting data centers out in the middle of what used to be farm fields. There's no power there. And so there are literally power plants being developed on site adjacent to each of the data centers. And sometimes some of the noisiest parts of the equipment are the parts of the site are related to the power generation. Where the rubber really usually hits the road is with city or county ordinances, and those might be areas where they've been developed over time to establish good criteria for noise levels, good numbers that can be used as benchmarks. But there's a lot of unwritten norms that say this is how we do things around here, but it's not really written down. And so in order to try and avoid that, we often will find ourselves in situations where there is no clear code and we need to help figure out for everybody involved how to get to the point that we need to be. So some people have just said, forget it, we're not going to worry about it, we're just going to design without worrying about noise. Very bad idea. Another thing that some people might propose is to say, well, just don't increase the background noise level in the area. That's often technically unfeasible, and honestly, defining what is the background noise level in a community is really tough to do. So what we've been doing is approaching the authorities having jurisdiction and getting into just different kinds of agreements that many communities might not know is within their power to do, and that is to do something which we most often see referred to as a noise proffer, but sometimes it's referred to as a zoning entitlement, or I think if you're in California, it's a condition of approval. There's a lot of different things that it's called, but it's essentially a written agreement where everyone says, this is how we are defining whether the noise is acceptable in this place or not. It's effectively developing a noise code that is project specific. So we've seen background noise levels we've seen noise levels with different ways of measuring them. From a technical aspect, dBA measured noise levels are most common. dBc, which takes low frequency noise better into account, often comes into that. Looking at different noise levels being allowed at different times of day. And one of the big deals is applicability of emergency generators and how they are tested, because every one of these sites has emergency noise generators associated with them. We often get into seeing things like tonality, attenuation requirements, issues for contingencies of how we measure things after the fact, and all that comes together to be an opportunity to be able to create an agreement that everybody can look at and point to and say, we're all on the same page together. So, again, if there's no code, that doesn't mean there's no risk. It can create all kinds of problems after the fact. But if there is no code, we can look at doing noise proffers, conditional agreements, or working to refine local noise codes so that the data center developers and the community can all come together and make sure that they are mutually agreeing to what constitutes a successful outcome for these data center spaces. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll now do some Q&A. Want to open up to the room first?
Thanks so much for the presentation. I'm curious, in the instances where there's no code, no pre-existing regulations, what stage does the discussion start to happen about proffering? Where does that happen, and how potentially, the people who are building the data centers, do they know, or it seems like they might default to there's no codes, we'll just do what we want? No,
it's a really good question. So I would say that one of the things which I actually think is very good for the overall industry is that there's a lot of developers who are doing data center after data center after data center. They might be developing it for a particular client, whether it's a particular cloud service or a particular tech company, but they'll reach out to and partner with a developer who knows how to build these things. You might know how to build a rack of computers, but you have no idea how to build a power set, how to build a power plant. So the developers, fortunately, have learned, mostly by poor trial and error in decades past, to involve someone like myself early on to be able to say, look, we need to get these agreements in place so that we are minimizing our risk. They might be spending, $2 billion on a data center. They want to make sure that all their I's are dotted and T's are crossed early on so that they don't have to abandon a site.
Yep.
I was just wondering, because these centers are built out in the middle of farmland,
Mhm.
but you have protesters or people that are complaining about noise complaints. So I guess how far away are people typically that are having problems with the noise? I don't know how loud these centers are.
No, so it really does depend. I mean, oftentimes we may be dealing with people who are half mile away from the site or more even, that could potentially be impacted by the noise. And so there's a lot of very substantial noise control steps that are often taken with the equipment on the site, that if you were in an urban environment, maybe you wouldn't have to do. But since we're out in these quieter settings, just making sure that we are taking all of the additional steps necessary. I mean, sometimes the noise the amount of money that is spent, the weight of the things that are getting put on the building to control noise, all those sorts of things are unlike things that we see in just about any other kind of project. But they're necessary in order to achieve the kinds of noise control that's necessary.
We have some online questions.
Yeah, thank you. We do have a few questions from our live streamed audience.
Great.
The first one, Avery Thompson writes, is this focused primarily on new development or existing development? And what are some unique considerations of both groups?
It's a good question. So what our work that we've been talking about sort of in this presentation today is mostly focused on new development. The idea that you're starting with a green field and you are developing it up from there. How do you make sure that all the steps get put into place there? That said, there certainly are plenty of times where all those steps have not been properly taken, and we get involved after the fact. Noise control after the fact for a data center, it can be done. It also is very costly, very difficult. But, and the challenge can be that if there wasn't a code in place when the facility was built, how do you then reasonably enforce it after the fact? So we have gotten involved in that, and those can get a little, I'll be honest, they can get messy. But if we can find a way to hit a standard, to work with everybody involved to make sure that a proper standard is negotiated for what will be considered a successful outcome, then at least we can determine, then we move into the technical feasibility. What can actually be built? Can it actually be supported? Can it be physically installed? Do there need to be major changes in equipment? So those are, it is a very different set of technical solutions after the fact, but again, that kind of agreement on what the standard is the trickiest part.
Thanks so much. The next question is from Jessica Sansurin, and it is, are there any cities that come to mind that can be seen as great examples for a baseline for noise regulation?
Yeah, that is a great question. I would say that from the data center perspective, California as a state has some very good regulations because they started early on, of course, with all of the tech boom with some of the initial data centers were built there. Northern Virginia has had a lot of experience, and so putting together some strong, very good noise codes together in those areas. Those are some of the ones that come to mind as good examples. Of ones that are already good options. I'm sure I could come up with some others. They're not coming to mind immediately. But then we've also had really good options doing the proffers in individual areas. We've had really good experience even recently in Albany, Ohio, of all places. There's a little data center boom happening there for some reason, but as a result, been some great negotiations.
Great. Last one from the online folks. This one's from Anushay Bhandari. Anushay is asking, what is the benefit to building data centers near residential areas instead of taking advantage of cool climates somewhere?
Yeah, so that one, I'd say that there are the deepest technical reasons for that go beyond acoustics enough that I probably can't answer that thoroughly. But it does have to do with where the data lines are and how easy it is to get from one spot to another. There are also, of course, people that work there, and so having both the ability to construct and have the people who are employed and working there on a regular basis, having some local population. That said, I couldn't tell you what all of the reasons that go into exactly what sites they've chosen are, but we tend to get brought in after they've already said, we kind of want this site, how will this work? And then we can evaluate it from there.
as someone based in Northern Virginia, it's great to hear that we have some good stuff going on. Thank you so much.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you.